Hi, Silver friends. This is Katie from Katie Goes Platinum, and this is my friend
Joli from QuickSilverHair, and this is the Silver Thread.
Today, we wanted to have a little conversation with you about what it means to age authentically. And Jolie, I think you are really good at providing a definition of what authenticity means to you. So let's hear that first.
So for me, embracing my authentic self is about something, it's layers, right? I keep finding like, is this me? Does this work for me? One thing was my hair. Did I like having it dyed? Did I feel comfortable with doing it for another 40 years? My grandmother lived to be 96 years old, and I had to decide at some point, if I'm going to live to be 96 years old, do I want to dye my hair that entire time? I'd been dyeing it since I was 20 years old. So embracing my authentic self through ditching the dye was a choice for me. That might not be a choice for everybody, but that was one thing for me that presented another layer of authenticity. But I think overall authenticity, it's kind of like a fingerprint. It's very unique to the individual. It's very defined by that person. So authenticity to me might be wearing really nice clothes every day and having dyed hair and having a very simple makeup palette, or it might be something completely opposite to that. But it's really about the individual.
That's how I feel too, because I feel like authenticity is doing what you want and what works for you. And so we've had this conversation before. I've had comments online saying like, I thought that being authentic meant going gray and not wearing any makeup. But for me to feel like Katie, I like having my hair gray for sure, but it's also wearing makeup. It's some days walking around the house dressed like a slob. It's other days, putting a little more effort in. It's my quirky personality. It's like, it's unique to me. It's like a fingerprint, like you said. And I feel like it's just something that you have to come to yourself.
Well, authenticity and self-identity are very intertangled. And self-identity is self. That's how I identify myself. And I think we sometimes in our culture, it's very possible, we had a conversation about this, where everybody starts to look the same. And when you start embracing authenticity, you are standing up and saying, I don't want to look the same as everyone else. I want to look like me.
I love that point, because when I was a little kid, I'm so grateful for my parents. The culture that I grew up in would dress kids in a way that I found very uncomfortable. Like if you went to church on Sunday, you're going to have your little dress with tulle underneath,
Yeah.
little scratchy tulle. You're going to have your little white gloves and uncomfortable shoes. And as you know, I have sensory processing issues. So tulle would have made me go crazy. And my parents never forced me into wearing these things that made me uncomfortable. So I grew up feeling like I could be who I am.
That's a really good point. That's a layer, right? That's a layer for you that defines your authenticity, because your culture that you grew up in had a definition of what you were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And your sensory issues, your own internal clock, your own internal system said, no, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. I used to get in trouble when I was a kid. I would, if I didn't like my fit out, I always said things backwards, but so if I didn't like my fit out, I would take it off. I would hide it. I got caught one time burying my clothes in the garden.
I love that.
So I had, at a very early age, I was like, no, this doesn't work for me. So I think for both of us, there was an early drive for who is me.
Yeah.
And I think we both live in different environments in that way, but I think it's really interesting. The more conversation we've had about it, the more aligned our thoughts have been, which is pretty fascinating.
That's true, because we were talking earlier today about you living in Albuquerque and me living in Los Angeles, and the outside pressures are different in Los Angeles than they are in Albuquerque. For me here, even though I'm not in the movie industry does influence the culture, and we have a lot of friends in that industry. My husband was part of that industry, and there's an expectation of looking a certain way. At least there was for a long time. I don't know if it's still like that, because we're not in it anymore. even if you were on the periphery, like I was just married to somebody in that industry, and you're supposed to look young, and you're supposed to dye your hair, and you're supposed to care about jewelry, which I've never cared about, as you can see, no jewelry. It's like, that's partly for sensory reasons too, but it's hard when you're younger, I think, to feel comfortable always being your authentic self and what feels good to you. But that's one thing, a joy I found about being over 50. It was much easier for me. Like, I always did just be myself, but now it's easier for me to do it without caring about what other people are thinking as much as I did before.
I think you just brought up a really good point, that when you're younger, it's really confusing and it's really hard to, and of course, you and I grew up without social media. So there was no social influence coming at us all the time with this is the way it's supposed to be. And yet we both grew up in cultures where there was an expectation of how it was supposed to be. I grew up in a Sunday best type household also, but I cannot imagine the amount of pressure our youngers are experiencing right now. Just watching social media from this age, I'll be 50 this year, I find it daunting. Like, it's overwhelming how much pressure there is to, age a certain way. You have to have the certain skin creams and the fillers and the plastic surgeries and the perfectly white teeth. And it's so much.
It's really too much. And, I have 2 sons, so I didn't have to deal with that same kind of pressure that girls have, because with girls, so much of it is about appearance. Unfortunately, the peer pressure is about appearance. I had friends with perfectly beautiful daughters who would post a picture on Instagram and instantly start getting very malicious comments about any perceived flaw, to the point where some of these girls are feeling actually quite suicidal. The girls I know who are younger, who are happiest, are the ones who stay off social media, because, as we know, being on YouTube and Facebook, even with, I feel like, a fairly high self-confidence, and I'm at that point in my life where I feel like I know who I am, people are mean, and they'll point out that my teeth aren't perfectly white because, I drink a ton of coffee, or they'll ask me why I want to look old by having gray hair. You'll look younger if you dye your hair. I mean, there's all these constant comments can really get to you. And at my age, it's easier to slough it off. But at 12, 13, 14, I can't imagine what damage it's doing.
So I started going gray when I was 13. And the phrase that I have heard the entire time from then to now has been, "You're too young to be gray." I was too young to go gray when I was 12. I was too young to cover my gray when I was 20. And I was too young to ditch the dye and go gray when I was 40. So it's like, what is the message there? How am I supposed to take that? Because the message is different depending on where I'm at in that journey, right? And I think that we confuse kids, we confuse youngers in that way. And it's also a note on ageism isn't ageist. So by that, I mean that no matter how old you are, whether you are a younger or an older, you will experience someone saying something to you that is ageism. Like, you're too young to, you're not old enough to, you're too old for that. There's all this language around being a certain perfect age.
Right. I find it so irritating. And I remember as a little child, I think I talked to you about this the other day, I was very tall, but I think by 6th grade, I think I was 5'5". I was tall for a little kid.
Same.
And because of that, I was expected to act a certain way, because even though I was 12, I looked 15 or 16. I think by age 10, I was almost as tall as my parents, or, they weren't the tallest people. So I was expected to act more mature than I was.
And that does bring a point to, I'm not a parent, but it brings you to the point of understanding that our own family will perceive us in a certain way.
Right.
And for a myriad of different reasons, like for you, it was your height just kind of automatically meant you were more mature and older when you were still a kid.
Right.
You just happened to sprout up and be tall. I think that that's something that perception is a very important part of all of this, because how we perceive ourselves and then how we project that out onto the world is where all of this kind of gets tangled together.
You're right, because your whole life, people are judging you based on their perception of what you are, or how old you are, and how you should act at a certain age. And about a year ago, I posted a picture of my living room on some home decor Facebook group because I had a question about how to decorate my fireplace for Christmas. And most people were nice, but this one woman said she saw that I had fairy lights around the perimeter of my living room. And I do that because they make me happy. I just like it. And also I live in a kind of a dark house. So I like to have the little twinkling lights at night. And really all that matters to me is that it makes me and my family happy. We like it. This woman said, "You are way too old to have fairy lights. You're not a child anymore. You need to take those down." And I remember thinking, why? I could be 97 and still like the fairy lights. I could be 30 with gray hair and like my gray hair. I wish I had done that. I could be 90 with dyed black hair. But if I felt good about myself with that dyed black hair, that's all that matters. But it's just weird that it's not just you thinking about yourself, it's other people judging.
When we post online, you've got instantaneous feedback from the world, whether you want it or not. And I think for both of us, as we've been on YouTube and so forth, we deal with some of that in a way that a lot of people would never have to deal with. But there are keyboard warriors out there, and they know everything, and they know that ambient lighting is not fairy lights.
Right.
Yes. I don't understand why that mattered. Like, who cares? But it's interesting that the second you post something, there is somebody out there that will find something wrong. They'll find some flaw with your hair, your skin, your lips, your eyes, your teeth. There's something. And I think it's really difficult to navigate that. And it is influencing how you decide what you're going to do next in this aging process. Like, are you going to ditch the dye? Are you going to ditch makeup? Are you going to stop shaving? Are you going to, start wearing overalls and a cowboy hat? And, what all of that influence does to you inside is where I think when you start embracing your authenticity, you start to turn all that off. You start to say, I don't want to listen to that anymore. I want to listen to what's going on the inside. And I think that that's the most important and most valuable part of being authentic is it's asking yourself what you want.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of us like to think that we don't care what other people think. I've always said that I don't really care what people think, but sometimes, we all do. You're a human being. You do. The real feeling of freedom that I found as I got older was when I got to the point where I made my decisions solely based on what I want to do. I'm not talking about like robbing a bank or, it's not okay to go murder somebody or whatever, but not that I want to do that, but making decisions about your own appearance. That's one of the great joys of being an adult. You don't have a parent or anybody trying to make you look a certain way. You can make your own choices, but getting that voice out of your head that tells you you're too old for that, you're too young for that. That's one of the real feelings of freedom, I think, is when you can stop doing that to yourself.
And that goes back to what I was talking about is ageism isn't ageist, and we do it to ourselves. We have this internal voice that says, I'm too old to do that. I'm too young to do that. I shouldn't be shopping in this section, or, trying to define your style as you age. Like, you can't shop in the teen section anymore, and you can't, you don't want to shop in that mature section in Dillard's anymore, because God forbid you look like an old lady. That just proves that, ageism is happening to us at every turn. It's in social media. It's in the store when you're standing in the store going, well, I can't shop in this section because clearly this is for the youngers. And I don't want to shop in that section because clearly that's for somebody else, and you have to make these decisions all the time as to where you fit in. And I think that, when it comes to all of the things, all the choices that we have, say dyeing our hair or not dyeing our hair, having fillers or no fillers, or having makeup on or no makeup, all of these choices, it really confuses who are you. Right. And I would say that it really confuses who you are, and then it confuses those around you, because if you can't nail it, if you can't figure out where you fit. And I think that's a big equation too, is there's a lot of people that can't figure out where they fit.
Right. And that's a horrible feeling of feeling like in limbo. My mom said this once, that depression is when you're between, like a lot of times depression happens when you're feeling like you're in an in-between place in your life. And it could also be, it's a disconcerting feeling when you're in between stages of how you want to dress, or you all of a sudden the person that you used to be is changing, but you haven't figured out quite who you are now. And I think that happens a lot, especially for those of us with kids, once they move out of the house and we need to figure out, who am I now? Like this part of my identity is gone.
Well, yeah, and that's specific to our age group, really,
Right.
because you end up with this empty nest syndrome and you have no idea where you're supposed to go. And of course, there's also retirement. If you add retirement into that, a lot of people have empty nest and retirement somewhere close together.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with this like double whammy of redefining your life. Because I didn't have children, what happens for me is I get thrown into shock during graduation and wedding season, because all of a sudden I'll get an invitation in the mail and I'll be standing at the mailbox and I'm looking at this invitation for, say, a graduation, and I'm like, oh, the last time I saw this person, they were in a car seat.
Right.
You know, and then I'm like, I walk back to the house the whole way going, how old am I? What just happened? When did they graduate from high school? You know, so you even then you're questioning yourself with variables that come at you that you're not expecting,
Right.
You know, including our health and those changes that come also.
I really get confused about these terms like pro-aging and anti-aging. Like I'm pro-aging in terms of I would rather be aging than not aging. You know, it's like it's definitely a pro to be aging, and I'm not against aging. But I think if we're being honest, it is hard as you get older that your body changes, your face changes. And I think the best way to be happy about that is just to kind of deal with it as you will. You know what I mean? Some days are good for me, some days are bad. Most of the time I'm fine with it. But I really think it's hard to put a general spin on how it is, because it changes every day. Do you feel like that, or am I making sense?
I don't know if it changes every day for me, but there are times when I will, like, I am being slumpy or whatever. I'm just wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants and my hair is pulled up in a messy bun, and I'll walk past a mirror and go, who was that? You know, like, who just walked past that mirror? You know, and I will stop and look at myself and I think about, how am I aging? You know, and I actually try not to think about it too much, because aging for me is the goal.
Right.
So when you say anti-aging, I'm thinking, well, that's dead.
Right. That's how I feel too. And I think
and that I would rather age. I think it's a privilege. You know, we talked about this earlier, that I experienced an extreme amount of loss at the age of 12. And I lost my older sister, who was 21. And it was in one summer, I lost 5 people.
Wow.
I mean, you want to talk about a crash course in life is precious.
Right.
I got it real early. And I think I've come from that place since then, you know, that life is precious and we shouldn't be fighting against it. We should be embracing it and doing what we need to do to make ourselves feel great while we do it. So I think that even when I pass the mirror and I have that moment, I have to stop and go, you're alive. You know, you're alive.
I do that too. And I have to say, I exaggerated a bit when I said every day. It's not really every day, but I do have those days when I think, oh boy, you know, here's my face is kind of melting. You know, it's like,
I think we all do though. I think that, and that's part of this conversation, is we're all thinking this. We're all having this, like, do I go get this wrinkle fixed? Do I need to stretch this out a little? Do I have the right creams and the right, or, you know, and then there's all of this language, right, that's coming out as crow's feet and wrinkles and laugh lines and I don't know what they call this, the middle line, your 11s or whatever, you know, it's just, there's a name for every little thing that happens to you as you age. And most of them are derogatory.
Yeah, almost all of them were derogatory. I have to tell you, when I was younger, I had beautiful skin because it's just genetic. I mean, I can't say it's anything special. It's just that my family has beautiful skin. You know, they're from the bogs or peat bogs or whatever of Ireland. So it's like, you know, I never really had to do anything to make my skin look good. I didn't have pimples really much as a kid, and I have had a very lucky time with aging. And I remember when I hit about 40, I went to the chiropractor. And he did something I still think is appalling that a man would do this. He looked at me and said, hey, you've got crow's feet just like me. First of all, who says that to a woman? And secondly, I hadn't noticed up until that moment that I had crow's feet. all of a sudden I'm in the mirror like, what does he mean?
And then you're obsessed about it. And it's just ridiculous because there's nothing you can do.
There's nothing you can do.
You can't really take them away. So I remember years ago on the Oprah show, they had like some cosmetologist or something, and they were talking about the foundations and creams and all of the things, the serums and everything. And he was talking about that there is absolutely nothing you can put under your eyes to change the way this works. So I was sat there thinking, wow, that means the entire eye cream industry is like a farce. There's nothing that you can actually put under your eye to change what's going on underneath your eyes. So it made me think about it from the perspective of, well, I just don't want my skin to be dry. I would rather just make sure that it's moisturized. So I focused from then on about finding a cream that was moisturizing to my eyes. But I wonder, like, had I never seen that, right? How obsessed would I be trying to find that cream, the perfect cream for under your eyes? Because there's a billion of them. And, I don't know what's changed since I saw that episode. I mean, we're talking that happened 25 years ago. Who knows?
Right.
Who knows what's changed in the formulations today? But it does bring around that you're constantly told to fix something.
Right.
That in the aging process, we're constantly being pressured to fix it. And fix it how? I mean, it really depends on who you are and what you want, and go back to your self-identity and what authenticity means to you and how you fix that. To me, a lot of the injectables and stuff are scary. I'm scared of them personally because I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, and it means I have fragile skin. I have a lot of allergies and sensitivities, and so to me, having something put inside me with an injectable that is going to stay there for however long it takes before it goes away, what happens if it's not great for me? Then I'm battling another issue on top of that. So it's like, I have to pick my battles. Is this something for me to worry about, or should I just skip over that and move on to something else?
I know. I feel like my anxiety keeps me from doing almost anything, which is good in a way, because I read one story about a woman whose fillers hardened, and I'm like, okay, that's not for me. And I read a story about a person who did Botox and got paralyzed. I'm like, okay. So I've always kind of wanted to just age on my own terms, and I have to say I was much more strident about it until this started happening. When you get older.
Yeah. So you start that little.
Yeah. And it's like, and then you think,
that horrible word called jowls.
Jowls. I hate that word. I think when I was younger, it was easier for me to be militantly against all the procedures because I still look great, and now I try to be understanding. I don't think I will do any. I can't say for sure, but I want to see what happens. I want to see what my elderly face looks like, I guess, without changing it. I want to see my mom, my grandma, my great grandma on my face, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I can understand that. And it goes back to what I was saying, is that if aging is the goal and you have seen your relatives age and you have a wonderful, loving relationship with these people and you're part of their bloodline, then you naturally want to go through that process with some grace like they did, if they did.
Right.
And I can see how that would influence you to want to do it in a more natural way. I mean, I'm not saying if you want to do something that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that I can really see how that would influence you to do it all natural, if that's what your family has all done.
That's true. And that's an interesting point too, because I have met women who ended up dyeing their hair after they went gray because they had a not good relationship with their mother or grandmother. And when they saw themselves with the gray and it reminded them that they looked like their mother more than they did before when they went gray, I don't know, they didn't want to be gray anymore. So I think, like we talked about before, a lot of this is so personal. Some people get pressure to not dye their hair or to dye their hair or to get plastic surgery or not to get plastic surgery. But it really comes down to what the person wants and what they emotionally need, because for some people, doing things the way that you and I are doing might trigger some feeling that makes them feel bad about themselves, and vice versa.
you know, we've watched thousands of women now, both of us, through these groups transition to gray, and we've seen several of them come back after they've fully transitioned and say, I can't do this, it's not for me. And that's a really good thing to know, is that you can ditch the dye, you can go through the whole entire process, you can grow it all the way out, and you can get to the end and go, nope, I look like so and so and I don't want to look like that.
That's also the advantage of hair dye and not dyeing, is that it's pretty easily fixable. If you go gray and decide you don't like it, you can just dye your hair again.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started being part of the support groups and helping others through it, one of the things I told people was that, you know, when I decided to do this, one of the things I told myself during the whole process was, if you get to the end and you hate it, you know exactly what to do.
Right.
You know exactly where to go get the dye. You know exactly what appointment to make. You know exactly what to do to turn it around and go back the way it was, if you want it that way. And I think it also gives you a chance to, for me, I also thought about the perspective of, I always dyed my hair a dark color and I didn't want to bleach my hair. But if I had grown it all the way out to gray, I could actually dye it a lighter color.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have to bleach it. I could just dye it a lighter color. So I had that in the back of my mind too. So really, it's authenticity comes with choices.
Right. It's true.
And you can change your mind.
Yeah. That's what scares me about doing something more permanent in terms of like plastic surgery or whatever, is that I know myself. And if I don't like the way I look once it's done, and it's not easy to go back, I'm a little type A, and that would drive me crazy.
Yeah, that could create a vicious cycle, right?
Right.
You could be like, well, I don't like it like this, so I'll go back and have a little bit more done, or a little bit of this done and a little bit of that done. And I think that does happen. I think a lot of people start to fixate on something, and then it doesn't quite go the way they wanted it to when it gets fixed, and then they end up in that cycle of trying to fix it instead of just kind of lay it down and let it go and let it dissolve. I know some of them dissolve and deteriorate over time. I don't know. I think it really is about your necessities. You know, what are the things that are necessary for you? Like, I mean, like hooded eyes can actually, you know, cause vision problems. They can interfere with your vision, and that becomes a necessity. You have to fix that, or you're going to have problems like driving and seeing your computer monitor and stuff like that. So I can see how, I mean, even in my family, a hooded eye is a thing. So if I have to make that choice at some point, you know, I certainly don't want to be judged for it.
Yeah, me too. And I have the same thing. Everybody in my family gets that too. And it is starting to affect my eyesight just a little. So my dermatologist told me that might be something, but I have to tell you, I'm actually a little scared because, as you know, and in case anybody else doesn't know, I've had this crippling shoulder issues for years. One of the issues I thought was contributing to it was that my breasts had kept getting bigger and bigger over time. Like, I'm a small framed person. And when I got married, I think I was a 32D. So I've always been fairly slender, small framed, but with a big breast. Yeah. And then after having 2 children and getting older, all of a sudden they just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I think by the time I went in for breast reduction surgery, I think I might have been a 34G. I mean, it was a lot bigger. It was uncomfortable and painful. My clothes, I didn't feel like they looked right. And my posture was bad. Yeah.
Starting to turtle. So
that's partly why I got the breast reduction. And while it helped my clothes fit better, and I sometimes can go out without a bra, which was not possible before, but I've had a lot of pain. I've had horrible keloiding from it. I've had probably 10 laser surgeries to try to reduce the scarring. And I don't really care about how they look. It's more that it was painful. I have shooting pains through the scars.
Yeah.
And so I'm not actually even done. I could keep doing probably 2 or 3 more laser surgeries to try to help one of my breasts finally stop hurting.
Have the scars relax.
Yeah. And I finally decided I just don't know if I want to keep doing it. So I can just picture I go in to get my eyes done and end up with these big keloided scars on my face. So,
well, I will tell you this. I did learn this just recently. The thinner your skin is, so like the very thin eyelid skin, the less likely it is to keloid.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So on my shoulder surgery, I have a keloid because, well, that's part of EDS also, is that our skin doesn't scar quite properly. Like it doesn't come back together because of the collagen issues. And most people with EDS have this thing called paper scars, where it's like this really thin scar on top of the skin, and it's real fragile.
Mhm.
So I've had those happen, but not very many. But I also get the keloids. So, like I can have a surgery like this one where there was 4 incisions, and I have
Mhm.
one that's keloided really bad. And
All right.
the other three didn't do this. So it's just weird. Like at random, one of them will keloid and one of them won't. But it is bothersome. And when that pain shoots through it, it's really bothersome.
It's bad, isn't it? Yeah, the pain,
Yeah.
the shooting pain is not pleasant.
They're weird when they have that like surge of like, I think it's nerves, you've got nerves that are tangled up in that tight skin that's
Yeah.
around that keloid. But yeah, I mean, having keloids removed is still a cosmetic procedure, and it's not an easy thing to go through.
No.
But it can become a necessary thing if you want to stop that pain that goes through them. I think the main point that we've been trying to make here is that all of this is so individual, and it's such a topic of your own needs rather than shoulds. Like, I could not make any of these decisions for myself if somebody was telling me, you should do this and you should do that and you should fix this and you should fix that. No. I would rather make that decision on my own based on my needs versus society's pressure.
Right. That's why it must have been so hard. You think of those young women actresses back in the old days when they had that studio system, and they'd say, okay, we're going to send you here to get your nose fixed, and then we're going to do this and get your teeth capped. And they had this whole thing they would do. And I can't remember, I think it was Lauren Bacall put her foot down and refused to let them pluck her eyebrows. She's like, no. She had to really tell them, no, this is how I look. Because they wanted to give her the pencil thin eyebrows. And she had those big, beautiful eyebrows. And they actually let her get away with it. And that kind of gave her her unique signature.
Well, and then think about the trend that started.
Right.
Because then that made big, beautiful eyebrows a beautiful thing rather
Right.
than thin, finely plucked brows. So, and of course, those are things that are cyclical. They go through this cycle of being on trend and off trend and on trend and off trend. But those of us who lived through the 90s, if we didn't pluck our eyebrows, we were lucky.
Oh my God. My eyebrows only have started to grow back recently from the 90s. I swear to God, I way overplucked them because I had, when I was a little kid, I had basically Groucho Marx eyebrows. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but they were thick eyebrows. And now
Mine were pretty thick. I mean, they still are. I joke that my eyebrows could have their own Instagram channel because people are always asking me what I do to my eyebrows, and I'm like, I really just leave them alone.
yeah, that's great. I leave mine alone too, but they don't look at it. The only reason they're this thin now is because I plucked them so much in the 90s, Oh my God. But sometimes they grow back if you use the right products. But yeah, it's not been easy. I feel like aging is such a hot topic. Authenticity is a hot topic, and it's hard to navigate for everybody, like we've talked about, but especially for the young people. What authenticity means is so unique to each of us. And I think it's important to listen to the voice that tells you what you like and what is authentic to you. And it's easier to do when you get older, I think, as opposed to younger, when you got all these external pressures, especially peer pressure. But it makes me think about this thing that you and I talked about earlier today, which was there was a story in the news about a convention. I think I'm just paraphrasing. I think if I remember right, it was a convention happening somewhere of young female influencers from like TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or somewhere. And they were all coming together for this convention. And a lot of them happened to run into each other, I think, on the subway. And they all happened to be dressed identically in the same authentic outfit, which was, how they thought it was authentic to them. And it was, the long hair styled a certain way, the big glasses, the big certain kind of glasses, the big overcoat, the white shirt with the gold jewelry, the big pants and a certain kind of shoes. And literally, I think it was like 20 women got together and realized this is not authentic. Like, this is what we thought was making us unique, and it's not. And I think it's because there's this social media pressure to be a certain way, and people kind of forgotten that it's okay to go your own way. Does that make sense?
Yes, and there's a bubble there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in social media, when you have like your group that you're exchanging ideas with and you're sharing your photos with, and you, like, for us, we have the silver hair group, and mostly everybody's going silver, and if we all got together, we'd all have silver hair.
Right.
So you do have that side of it, is your common interest will set up that you're same. But I think it's interesting from the perspective of when you follow the crowd all the time, you become the crowd.
Right.
And what I think a lot of women at a certain point in life, and I don't think there's a certain age here. I think it's just you just reach this like pivotal moment where you go,
Yeah.
this isn't me. This isn't how I want to be. I think most women go through some sort of reinvention of self.
Yeah.
Whether it's when they retire from their job, or they have the empty nest syndrome, or they change jobs, or they just have that moment where they're like, nope, I'm done. I got to change things. You know, for me, silver hair kind of pushed me into actually looking at myself all over. Like, I started to look at my external environment. I started to realize that my entire house was beige.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, why? I'm an artist. Why is everything in my house beige? And it just kind of, I sat one morning and I was looking at everything and I went, no, this isn't who I am. I'm a colorful person. I like colors. I like art. I like things when the art is present. I want it to be alive and beautiful. I don't want beige and blah. And now, beige has its place. You know, we need neutral spaces. You know, we need places that feel calm and quiet and that there's not too much going on. But my whole house didn't need to look like a therapist's waiting room. You know, I mean, it just, it was just so, I don't know. I just realized that silver hair wasn't the only thing I needed to adjust. My dial needed to be adjusted for, you know, the color of my environment to help me feel happier and feel more alive. I had struggled with my style all my life. So clothing style has always been something I struggled with. But as I started embracing these layers of authenticity, I don't know how many quizzes I took for style quizzes, you know, like, what's your style? But every single time it would come back with, you're just a t-shirt and jeans kind of girl. And I always resisted that, except that that's what I wore all the time.
Right.
You know, like, and then I was like, why am I resisting something that is just who I am? And that's another part of authenticity, is stop resisting who you actually are. Your subway story kind of conveys that in a way, is that we all get on this train together. We all look exactly the same. And you know, inside of yourself, that you're not all exactly the same.
You know, it's funny because I keep thinking about doing this video and I haven't figured out how to do it. So maybe I can just say it right here, which is I have thought about having this video or blog post called, what kind of an old lady do I want to be? Right. And so.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And so I've thought about this a lot. Like, my idea of what kind of old lady I want to be is different than probably a lot of people's. Like, I want to be an old lady who wears a lot of color, which I spent probably 20 years of my life only wearing black. You know, like, I was an art student. That was the thing to do, is to wear black, vintage dresses, combat boots, tights. I did all that. And it took me years to finally say, you know, I want a little color in my life. You know, I spent years dyeing my hair, even though I didn't want to, because I was afraid people would think I was older or that it would not look good. And I wore jewelry that I didn't want to wear because that's what women do. They love jewelry. They love shopping. I don't like jewelry or shopping. I mean, actually, let me put it that way. I like jewelry. It's uncomfortable to me. There's only very few pieces I can wear. But I grew up in a family where the women wear lots of jewelry, and that's how you're a woman or feminine. And it was considered weird not to. And it took me probably also till about the same time that I went gray to say, I don't have to do any of this stuff that I don't want to do. I can wear colorful purses. I could be a t-shirt and jeans girl one day, and then the next day, sometimes I like to really dress up. But I just think there's a freedom in realizing what you want your future life to look like. Like you're saying, you want to put more color in your life. I would like to have more color in my life too. I'm working on it. And also I want to be the kind of old lady who kicks butt. I don't know what that means, but like, I want to have donkeys bedecked in flowers and wear funky shoes or whatever. I don't want to.
I have a friend, we tease her all the time about that she's going to be the, you know, Weezer, you know, with the overalls on and the straw hat, you know, and she's totally embraced that. That's her thing. She wants to be an old lady in overalls and a straw hat. That's what she wants to do, you know, and I think it is something, it does speak to what you do to yourself now, right?
Right.
If for instance, if you exercise now, right, you're planting a tree for your future self in a way, because you're protecting your body, you're protecting your health overall, right? So that's, you are making a choice for your future self when you exercise. You're making a choice for your future self when you choose to eat the salad versus the pizza. You know, but we don't convey all that necessarily to aging, because sometimes we get stuck in right now it looks like this.
Right.
And we don't think about what is it going to look like 10 years from now. I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about the decisions that you make about like cosmetic procedures and stuff like that in particular. You know, if I do this now, what is it going to look like later?
You know, I was thinking about that today because, as you know, I'm expecting my first grandchild, which is exciting. And I was thinking, this is such a random thought, but you know the movie 16 Candles? Have you seen that?
Of course.
Oh, there's two sets of grandparents in that movie. Do you remember? There's the one grandma and grandpa who are very loving and very grandma and grandpa-ish. You know, like the grandma makes cookies. She's a little hefty. She's got no makeup. And then the other grandma and grandpa are very city-ish. You know, like the grandma has a tan and short hair, and she's
Yeah,
very
they're kind of
stylish.
posh.
Yeah,
That
and
would be the word I would use, but
and it's a stereotype kind of, because the city and the more glamorous grandma is not as warm as the, you know, kind of chubby, elderly looking grandma. And I was like, you can be both. You know, I could be the funky city grandma who runs around in my funky clothes or whatever, and I still want to cuddle the baby and be myself. Like there's no limits or rules. We can just be whichever kind of grandma we want to be. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, and I think that's a big segue there is how we age as mothers, aunties, grandmas, how we choose to age is influencing those youngers.
Right.
And I think it's really important to not obsess over glorifying youth. And one of the things that really caught my attention recently, it was a couple of years ago actually, was the discussion about middle age. Most people, when you say middle age, they think what, between 40 and 50? Like that's middle age, or smack in the middle that 50 is middle age. But if you really think about it by breaking it down into segments, right? 0 to 30 is a third of your life. 30 to 60 is a third of your life. And if you're lucky, 60 to 90 is a third of your life. And what's in the middle? 30 to 60 is middle age.
It's a huge range.
Yeah. It's a huge range, right? And 30 to 60, you age a lot between 30 and 60 years old. A lot of your aging process goes on in that time frame. A lot of your growth process happens in that time frame. And tons of changes happen. Lots of people have children. Those children grow up, they graduate from high school, and they go on to college, and they have their own babies. You know, between 30 and 60, a lot of life is happening. And yet we glorify in our society everything between 0 and 30.
Right. Isn't that
And it's crazy because you have 60 more years. You know, so 30 to 60 and 60 to 90, you have 60 more possible years of life.
Right. That's totally true. And it's so valuable. Like you said, those are usually the, I don't want to say the formative years. Those are the years when so much of life is happening, like you said. Big thing.
And a lot of women, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I think a lot of women, you know, they do mommyhood, right? And they're mom for this certain segment of time. But then after mom, they have to we go back to this kind of reinventing ourselves. We hit 50. I hate that term, hit 50. Like, what are we gonna do? Take a baseball bat to it? But we get to 50 or 60 or whatever, and it's this total reevaluation. And I think it is an important moment.
It is. And it's funny because I think like a lot of us, because I still have one kid at home and the other one's moved out and having his baby soon. But I found myself kind of adrift for a little while. And I felt like, who am I? You know, because you're so used to being so involved. And it didn't just affect my day-to-day life, but also my style. Like I felt like for years I just dressed in a way that would not be hard to fix if somebody spilled something on me, or we went hiking at the last minute, or we wrestled around on the ground or whatever.
Oh yeah, you have mom life clothes.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden I had been very kind of stylish in college, you know, and not so much high school. Well, I was stylish, but if you consider the 80s or stylish,
we had our own style. That's for sure.
We had our own style. I don't know if I'd want to go back to it, but yeah, I've been adrift for a couple of years. Like, what's my style now? And I haven't quite gotten there yet, but it's actually kind of fun because you get to reinvent yourself again, like you said. And one thing I really learned from a book I read a few years ago is old beliefs I had, just because I had a belief doesn't necessarily mean it was true.
Yeah.
And so, and going gray kind of made me reevaluate just not the cosmetic changes I was going through, but also what beliefs do I have that haven't been serving me well? And I think when you're talking about influencing the younger generation, I think that's good for them to see women showing up on social media and elsewhere talking about that there's these big life changes, and who you are now doesn't necessarily have to influence who you are in the future. You can keep stopping, reevaluating, deciding who you want to be and how that looks.
I mean, I said it earlier, the beautiful thing about choice is you can change your mind.
Right.
You can say, this wasn't for me, or, oh my gosh, this is for me. I have to go after this. I didn't think I would. And I think that brings us to, what some of the really positive sides of aging are, is that we get a little bit more freedom to make choices. So when your kids graduate and go off to school and have their own families and everything, you get a little bit of time to make your own decisions and make your own choices for you. And, I don't have kids, but as I've gotten older, I've learned how to say yes.
Yeah.
I have said no a lot in my life. I've said no to this, said no to that, and I had a lot of fears and a lot of anxiety and so forth. And just kind of learning a little more often to say yes to something. And I'm not great at it yet. I'm having to practice. I have to, think about it. I have to go, why am I saying no to this? And I think it is part of the authenticity, is asking yourself, why do I believe this?
Right.
And is this even my belief? Like, where did this come from? Where did I learn it from? Was it somebody else's belief? Like, did my mom hand this down to me? Did my grandmother hand it down to me? Did I learn it at church or school, or, and does it work for me?
I love that. And I feel like slightly the opposite in terms of, I was always more yes when I was younger, and now I have the freedom of saying no more. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's things that I did for years I didn't really want to do, and now I'm saying no. I'm fine. I'm reclaiming my time and not putting up with things I didn't like. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of freedom in getting older and feeling more free to choose your own way, which I love.
It is a freedom. And my mom taught me this, and that is that no is a complete sentence. Also, yes is a complete sentence. And you don't owe anybody an explanation for any of it, which that boils all this down into a really perfect point, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever choice you make in your aging process, ProAging, authenticaging, whatever you want to call it, doing it, owning it, and not explaining it. You don't owe anybody that explanation.
Yeah, I love that. It's true. You just age your own way. And, we're all going to get those outside pressures. We're going to have people telling us, like we said earlier, you're too old for that. You're too young for that. Or why are you wearing that eyeshadow? You can't wear, what do you call it? Glimmering eyeshadow when you're a certain age. And I've decided to say, I'll do whatever I want. I like sparkly eyeshadow. I'm going to keep wearing it. I don't care as much what other people think now about what I do. And that's so freeing. And I hope that the younger women, if any younger women are watching this, but also the younger women who see all of us living the way we want to, I really hope they do see that there's another way, that you don't have to feel pressured to do a certain thing or live a certain way, or look a certain way.
The only conformity you need to make is to yourself.
Right.
Conformed to the way you want to be. And you get to be the clay maker. You get to mold yourself however you want to. And I think that's the most important, valuable lesson I think I've ever learned, was that it was up to me. I think that that's what most people don't often get when they listen too much to all the outside pressure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Oh, I love this conversation. I think it's such an important one to have.
I did too. And I think we could probably go on forever about it, but I think we talked about some really powerful things today.
Yeah, me too. So I forgot once again to remind everybody, if you really enjoyed this podcast, if you found it helpful, fun, or informative, I do hope you will hit the like and subscribe button, and make sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss our future podcast episodes.
And in both of our description boxes, you will find our email forms to sign up for our newsletter, which for us is one of the best ways you'll hear from us and the easiest ways to stay in contact. And we do hope to see you next time. So until then, shine on.
Shine on.